Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a video on Diablo 2 project and design lead David Brevik's thoughts on Diablo 2 versus Diablo 3 with some bonus thoughts on Path of Exile. This is our second to last video in our David Brevik interview series. Be sure to have watched the other videos linked in the description below and stay tuned for our conclusion to the series. We'll lead this video with a question about Diablo 2's loot system versus Diablo 3's. Which should David Brevik prefer?
I mean, I love Diablo 2's system, and I think that it's stood the test of time. People still love it today. I think that it had the right balance. It took a while to get to that balance. People don't quite remember that. Like, it didn't really get that great until like 1.09. So I think that it took us a while of iteration and time to actually come to a point where we felt like we really got it great. I think that, again, they went the route with the new loot system more in an accessibility kind of thing. Like, I can look at my DPS number and get all the information I want. It's a simpler kind of system. It's a little bit more of apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. And so it's just it's up to individuals' preferences. I particularly I like the apples to oranges because then there's no right answer and they can't judge my balance as well. I think that I think that the Diablo 2 loot system is still, people still think that it's probably one of the best ARPG loot systems out there. And so I don't think that Diablo 3's was particularly bad. I think that it was fine. But I think that I personally prefer Diablo 2's kind of customization. I felt was a little bit more intriguing. And maybe it was not, maybe it's just because it was invented in my house that I'm being kind of an ass here. But but I think that it was just my personal preference, and big surprise, I prefer the design that I worked on, which it's not, maybe I'm not being fair.
As you can see, David Brevik specifies that his preference is just that, his preference, and not an absolute declaration of one system being better than the other. And he admits his bias. It's natural that the thing that you made is the thing that you'll prefer. When he's talking about apples to apples instead of apples to oranges, what he means is that in Diablo 3, it's pretty clear when an item is an upgrade or not. Not just because the game crunches the numbers for you and shows you whether your damage or toughness goes up or down, but also because the attributes are able to be quantified that way. Crit chance, attack speed, crit damage, main stat, vitality, armor, all resist, all these things can translate into neat little damage or toughness numbers. In Diablo 2, we instead had a lot of attributes that couldn't be so easily quantified and subsequently compared. Is gaining +1 to all skills worth losing X amount of damage? Is this much extra attack rating better than decreasing an enemy's defenses by 33%? Is it better to have a chance to inflict open wounds, or is it better to decrease an enemy's defense with every hit? Both systems have their pros and cons. Diablo 3's is more accessible. People don't generally have to think too much about whether an item's an upgrade or not. Diablo 2's is deeper. You need to make more meaningful choices. Path of Exile, for instance, continued with Diablo 2's system, and I wonder whether Diablo 4 will return to that form of system or stick with Diablo 3's more simplified itemization. Next, I asked David Brevik whether he preferred Diablo 2's trading system or Diablo 3's.
So, trading systems are interesting. So trading systems, I love Diablo 2's trading system, but the reason that Diablo 2's trading system works is because of the limited audience size that you have to interact with. And by that, I mean, when you're in the Battle.net chat room, there's only a few people that you're spamming items at or whatever. Like, there's only a few people. It's really tough to actually trade items in Diablo 2. It's a pain in the butt. And so the easier you make trading in any game, the easier that you make trading, the more that people can do it and participate and exchange things with ease, the more important it is that some of the items bind. Or else you especially in an action RPG, you ruin the game. The point of the game is to find items. If you can find items by just going to the auction house, it's the auction house game, and that sucks or whatever. And I'm not talking about auction house, real money auction house versus not real money auction house or anything like that. I'm just talking about the point of the game is to go out and find this stuff. But if you can find the best stuff, then it's not very fun. So it's very important. The easier you make it to trade items, the reason that Diablo 2's economy works is because you can only trade items with a few people. It's really hard to like connect with people and stuff unless you know them in real life or you're in this particular chat room or you're like, you know, even then it's a small audience of people that you're like dealing with and things like that. Like a general person that is playing Diablo 2 for the first time, they don't even know about some of this stuff, right? You know, they don't even know how to go in and do these kind of things. So like finding these weird items and using them is difficult. And so because it's difficult and obtuse and it's really kind of it's not clear how exactly to go about doing any of that stuff, it works really well. It makes it so that you don't have to have binding items. But again, the easier you make it, the more important it is that at least some of the slots must be bind on pick up / bind on equip. I prefer both. Bind on equip at least gets the items out of the economy. Which is very important. And because there's always items coming into the economy. If you don't get rid of them, then you run into trouble. This is why we, did the thing with the Stone of Jordan and stuff like that in Diablo 2 patch, because there are just so many, because all the duping and all this kind of stuff. So like going in and like trying to get rid of items out of the economy is really important, as well as having, and there's different ways to do binding. You can do it just bind on pickup. You can do it on, it has a certain amount of charges of binding or something like that. You can, so you can bind something 3 times before it's like gone, or, there's like all sorts of ways that you can go about doing it. But you have to have some system that it's important to make sure that people can't just find whatever the hell they want. Also, it's very important that some of the slots you can never trade. And some of the slots, are available, because if you put everything up for trade, then you'll find everything that you ever need.
But you do still feel there should be some element of trade, but not
absolutely. Trade is awesome. It is so much fun to trade items with people and get better items and stuff like that. It's a healthy, important part of an MMO. And my preference is to make a similar kind of thing that they have in World of Warcraft, where people put up the items for auction in the auction house. They're up for 24 hours. You pay some gold. Some people, you can go in and search and peruse and whatever, and you buy the things that you want. And that kind of style of auction house or whatever, in-world auction house, I think is the best style. It's like you can't find everything you need, but you can find a few things, and they're usually terribly expensive, and so you get a lot of money drained from the economy and things like that. And so like that kind of system, I think, works best.
This was an insightful response, and I really didn't expect World of Warcraft to be his answer. The biggest problem with vanilla Diablo 3, of which there were many, but the biggest problem was that the most efficient way to play the game was to play the auction house. Literally every good item that I had, I got from the auction house. And flipping items on the auction house was the fastest way to make gold to buy items on the auction house. When the best way to get gear so that you can be good at playing the game is to not play the game, there's a problem. Loot 2.0 saved Diablo 3. It made Diablo 3 fun to play again. The auction house was removed, and drop rates were buffed to account for the lack of trade. You can argue that since then, drop rates have been buffed too much, largely thanks to power creep, and that it's too easy to find gear. But what is unquestionable is that when Loot 2.0 was first implemented, it was a massive improvement over the system that existed prior. But did Blizzard go too far in limiting trade? David Brevik seems to think so. And it does make sense that having a healthy economy helps maintain a healthy community. By effectively removing trading entirely in Diablo 3, Blizzard removed a big part of what contributed to the online community in Diablo 2. Now, I used to be totally on board with Loot 2.0 and no economy. And I say that as someone who played hours of auction house in D3 every day and made real money. In Diablo 2, I didn't really get into trading. It just seemed too burdensome. So I was happy when the economy was just removed from Diablo 3. But now I wonder if Diablo 3 would have a more healthy community today if we had some form of limited trading like David Brevik is discussing. Path of Exile, for instance, does have trading, though from what I'm gathered, it's not limited in the way that David Brevik describes. But I'm not entirely sure. I've only done a little bit of trading in Path of Exile so far, but the system does seem to be like Diablo 2's, just with a lot more third-party software and websites to streamline the process. I actually asked David Brevik, what are some of the aspects of Path of Exile that Diablo 3 could really benefit from?
So I think that Path of Exile, I think that the atmosphere of Path of Exile is much darker than Diablo 3. I am more of a gothic horror kind of person, as you'll see from my artwork when you see my indie game. But I'm much more of a darker, scarier kind of atmospheres. That's what I appreciate and I like the most. So I don't know if that's wrong or whatever, or different or whatever. But I think that's what I appreciate a lot about PoE is that I also really like the fact that they are really. They're not non-apologetic about how complicated it is to make the skills, and like their system that where you add the gems to to customize your character and your skills and things like that, I think is a really great idea. And it's complicated and it's huge, and it's you can sit down and have a sandwich and study the thing for 3 hours or whatever, and really kind of get into it. So I like that. But again, that's not really a kind of a Blizzard philosophy. Blizzard's philosophy is much more of a design. We're going to design this thing. So a lot of people, we had, when I was first working there, we had this thing called the mom test, whether or not my mom could actually play this particular product. Then we knew that it was, more of a mass audience kind of a thing. So it was like, if it's too nerdy, too grognard, too in the weeds, then you're going to lose a lot of people, and people are not going to be that fascinated by it. But that said, I like that about PoE. I think that that's one of the strengths of it, is that it's kind of it's more of a hardcore game than Diablo 3 is in a lot of ways. And so I think that whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't really know. I'm not saying that Diablo 3 is bad or anything. I'm just saying that its choices and the way that you go about creating your character and stuff is much more complex than it is in Diablo 3, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that seems to be the major difference between the two games, the two different takes on the RPG. One made to how do we say this without, I was going to say coddle, but that has a negative connotation. Accessible versus unforgiving, as you said, or sort of 90s era difficulty, if you almost want to call it that.
Yeah.
This is largely what I said in my Path of Exile versus Diablo 3 video. A lot of people said that I shouldn't have compared the two games until I'd gone to Path of Exile's endgame, and while I could see the logic there, I feel that for the brief overview that I was doing, I don't think getting to the endgame would have changed my overall message, which is that Path of Exile is a game that strives for depth but lacks accessibility, whereas Diablo is a game that strives for accessibility but lacks depth. Both games succeed in their mission, but as a player, you may value depth or accessibility more, just as David Brevik seems to value depth more. I went on to ask some more general questions about his thoughts on Diablo 3 itself as a successor to Diablo 2, and I just had to get his thoughts on how Blizzard killed off our beloved Deckard Cain. What are your thoughts on how they killed off Deckard Cain?
Well, I think that's a real shame. I like Deckard Cain as a character, and I thought he was fun. And I thought that, his death wasn't as ceremonious or, as I would like to have seen it. But again, that's up to them. And they felt like they wanted to, move on from that character and give some of the story some depth and some consequences and see, when people write stories, heroes live and die, and that's what makes the thing intriguing, and that's what adds drama. I thought that overall the story for Diablo 3 was pretty good, so I don't really think that one little thing that I thought wasn't the best wasn't, I don't want to nitpick that one point or whatever when there is plenty of good things too.
David Brevik is far more diplomatic about this topic than I am, and gives Blizzard far more credit than I do about Diablo 3's story. I've written tirades over Diablo 3's story, but I'll drop it. As long as they bring Kain back as a Force Ghost in Diablo 4. Then David Brevik and I got to talking about the Necromancer coming to Diablo 3, and while he didn't have much to say on the topic, because at the time at least, he was too busy with his projects to really be up to speed on how the Necromancer was shaping up, he did have this to say.
That's why I'm saying that I think that, they're not going to have a whole bunch of updates for Diablo 3 at this point. If they're adding one class and it comes out a year after the announcement, that's, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a whole bunch of big patches coming for Diablo 3.
Now, he's not suggesting that he has any inside info on this. He's simply speaking as someone who has worked with Blizzard for many years, and has worked on a number of games, and is familiar with development pipelines. Based on the fact that it took a year to make the Necromancer, and that nothing else major seems to be in development for D3, David Brevik does not expect there to be much more content coming to the game after the Necromancer. And he did not say this as a criticism or with any form of negative connotation. Remember, Diablo 2 stopped receiving new content at some point, and that was okay. Diablo 2 stopped receiving new content because a second expansion or a new game was in the works, and that's where efforts were focused. Now, I wanted to end this video with David Brevik's thoughts on what the Diablo 3 devs did absolutely right.
I think that in a lot of ways, they did a bunch of stuff really well. I mean, I think that the amount of the feeling like, the lag and all of those kind of things, like being able to support that many people online and being able to have the game smoothly operate, is pretty damn incredible. So technically, I think that they did a superb job. I think that they did a great job in the way that that I think some of the skill design I think was really fun. I think that they're the way that you move around and you attack things and stuff like that feels very visceral, and and the sound effects are really amazing. And they when you hit something, it clangs and it feels good or whatever. It's very strong. And so the action, the moment-to-moment action, I think is pretty good. I think the effects may be slightly over the top, but that's kind of I'm the one to talk. Marvel Heroes is exact same. So I think that sometimes you can get lost in the action, but overall I think that the moment-to-moment action in the game is quite good.
And that wraps up this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Did you prefer the way Diablo 2 did things, or do you prefer Diablo 3's approach? Stay tuned for our final video in this series, which will release very soon, and be sure to check out the previous videos, links in the description. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.